So this video is going to be about register. Now, traditional studies of language often focused on the user of a language. This is known as dialect. The problem with this approach is that it fails to consider that the use of the language dictates the form of the language much more than the user does. What we mean by this is that we can consider that one person speaks a dialect, maybe another variety of English or something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they use that form of the language at all times. And it doesn't even tell us much about the form of the language itself, because if you were to talk to a doctor, that's very different than writing a letter to your boss. You see, those are both instances of language in which many things vary. Now, when we talk about register, there's three facets that we have to consider. These are field, tenor, and mode. These were proposed by Michael Halliday, and he says with these three facets we can analyze all instances of text for register. Now, the field is essentially the topic of the discourse. Whatever you're talking about, whatever you're writing about, etc., this is the field. Now, look, they can be very generalized topics, such as talking about everyday activities, or highly specialized, such as talking about applied linguistics. This, of course, has an impact on the language that you use. If you're talking about everyday topics, chances are that the entities that exist in the language, so all the nouns, the nominal groups, etc., will be fairly concrete. They'll be about everyday things. Whereas if you're talking about applied linguistics, there'll be a much more abstract to that. Next we have tenor. Tenor refers to the language users, their relationships to each other, and their purposes. So to give an example of what this means is think of two PhD researchers talking about applied linguistics, and that would be different to a professor talking to an undergraduate about applied linguistics. So essentially, who you are and who you're talking to, or who you're trying to communicate with, dictates what kind of language that you use. Think about it. The way you talk to your best friend, and the way you talk to your boss, and the way you talk to the queen will be very different. The last facet is mode. Mode refers to the method of communication. Now look, this is a spectrum with writing on one side and speaking on the other. This is a very simplistic way of looking at it, but it does help quite a lot in terms of analyzing the language. Writing tends to be more nominal heavy. There tend to be more abstract nominal groups, much more what we call nominalizations, where a verb is then taken and turned into a noun. This allows for more packaging of meaning, allows you to create much more meaning in your text. Where spoken language tends to be more grammatical, tends to be much more grammatically complex as well, rather than that. Writing tends to be very, very simple in terms of grammar, much simpler than spoken discourse. Now, in between these two spectrums, I mean, you have all kinds of variations. So writing to your best friend and writing a book for an international journal would require different forms of language, you know. There's even newer methods of communication, such as email. Email is writing. However, if you're writing a personal email, it might be much more close to the spoken form. Text messages, Twitter, all these kinds of things. So the mode is essentially what the method of communication is, and this does have a huge impact. Now, how is this useful for English language teaching? Well, analyzing what students already know about a given register will allow the students to utilize the schemata. What this means is that prior to a task, I'll use a listening task as an example. I would say to my students, okay, we're going to listen to an interview between a radio host and a professor of physics. Okay, I write field, tenor, and mode on the board. I say, okay, what's the field? The field would most likely be physics. Okay, the tenor, who are they? Well, one would be the radio host, and the other would be the professor. What's their relationship? Interviewer, interviewee. What is their purpose? Well, the radio host's purpose is to elicit more talk from the professor, and the professor's purpose is to disseminate his knowledge onto the radio, on the radio, I should say. And what's the mode? Well, the mode is spoken, but it's an interaction, and it's designed to have an audience as well. Think about it. Talking privately and talking in front of an audience are two different things. So with this in mind, we can start predicting with the students what kinds of things they would expect. They would expect the radio host to ask a lot of questions. They would expect the professor to give long answers, not just one-word answers like yes, no, things like this. We can start saying, okay, what do we know about the field? What do we know about physics? We know that it's complicated. We know that there's different theories in physics, such as quantum or relativity. What do we know about radio host and professor relationships, or like interviewer-interviewee? Okay, one person will be asking a lot of the questions, the other person will be answering a lot of them. And what do we know about spoken discourse? We know that it tends to be more grammar heavy. However, because this is for an audience and it's a highly specialized topic, it may be more nominal heavy than normal spoken discourse. I use this all the time now with my students, whether it's for listening tasks or for reading tasks or writing or speaking, and it does help elicit much more, knowledge about the subject, and they can then apply it even further. They already know all this stuff. That field tenor mode, teaching them all that does is bring it to the forefront. Anyway, thanks for watching again, guys. I'll be making more videos about this method of teaching and systemic functional linguistics. Thanks very much.